This presentation is going to discuss agri-food movements and networks, and we're going to begin by looking in this video at the organic food movement, and then in another video we'll look at some other agri-food movements. So just by way of introduction, uh, one thing that all these movements will have in common is that they share a critical view of the conventional agri-food system. And there are a lot of weaknesses we've reviewed in other places of that system. We're not going to spend much time, offering more critique here. Instead, we're going to be looking more at the solutions offered by alternative food movements. And so, what we can see, is that there is actually some variety in terms of what those solutions will entail. Different emphases on what should be changed. So one thing they have in common is distaste for conventional corporate agri-food and big agribusinesses. But one thing they don't share is what to do about it. They have different ideas, although certainly there's a great deal of overlap. So now we can say confidently that there are several changes that are already underway with regard to alternative agri-food systems. Many of these kind of began on the fringes and have really started to blossom into a major institution. You can see that as evidenced by the growth in the number of farmers markets. You can see uh, from 1994, when there were fewer than 2,000 farmers markets nationally. By 2008, that had more than doubled, and now it's more than doubled again. So at that rate, we're just seeing a really wonderful growth of farmers markets. And the benefits of farmers markets are many, but among them, it gives farmers direct access to consumers, which means they don't have to go through a middle person, which usually means losing money. So they make more money on their crops. So also, the other thing is community supported agriculture. We can see a great deal of growth there. They were fairly uncommon when they started back in the 80s. You can see in 85 there were only 50 of them nationally. They really began to take off, and by 2008 there were 2,500, and that's gone up over sixfold. So CSAs, remember, those are the subscription-based systems where consumers will pay a certain amount of money and then they get a certain amount of food delivered to them, sometimes right to their door, other times at some kind of drop-off location, similar to a farmer's market, except instead of you going to a market and buying items from several farmers, basically you sign up with one farmer and they give you a preset share of their yield. And so that can yield you quite a bit of food. It's perhaps even more reliable. So let's look at the organic food movement. That's the biggest of all the alternative agri-food movements, and so it deserves the spotlight. And of course, like many of the other agri-food movements we can review, this one is focused on creating a sustainable system. Uh, Organic, the term itself, technically just means anything carbon-based, but we're not just talking about carbon agriculture, because everything produced in the conventional system is also carbon-based. Anything that's life is carbon-based. So what we mean really is the holistic approach, thinking of farming as an organism. Right? So it's more the metaphor of an organism that we get the word organic than the definition of organic, which is carbon-based. So by thinking of it as an organism, we are forced to think about food and agriculture in a more holistic framework. Here we can see that growth in sales in organic food has gone up. You can see very steadily at a pretty impressive clip. Going back to 2005, when globally this was about a $12 billion a year industry, to, let's go somewhere in the middle, 2013 it was about a little over 30 billion, and by 2020 we're brushing up against 60 billion. So this is really taking off. Clearly consumers are putting their money where their mouth is as far as wanting to have a more sustainable food system. When we look at types of food, because not all foods are equally represented in the organic movement, the United States Department of Agriculture conducted a study that goes back a little bit, but it looks from 2005 to 2014, and you can see that the bulk of organic foods that people buy are in the category of fruit and vegetables, followed by dairy and beverages. You can see that makes up more than half of organic food sales. Behind that are breads and grains, and to a lesser extent, snack foods, meat, fish, and poultry, and condiments are coming into the organic fold. So, I guess we can probably anticipate or expect more growth. But for a lot of reasons, meat continues to pose a major challenge to sustainable production. And a lot of people are really just shifting away from meat sources to other kinds of protein. Research on organic agriculture, a study by Willer and Kilcher, found that there were about 32 million hectares of land devoted to organic production globally, managed by over a million producers, and only a small percentage of that was actually certified. And then we could see that some of this was aquaculture, 0.4 million. About a third of organic land can be found in developing countries, most of this in more developed countries. About two-thirds are in grasslands. So we've been talking in other places about threats to forest lands, for instance, posed by farming, so that's a better fit. And international sales, well, we saw they're actually approaching 60 billion. The consumer market, though, is almost exclusively in the wealthier North American and European countries. So that is, of course, we can anticipate one of the critiques of the organic agri-food movement is cost. Of course, the reality is food, if it's going to truly reflect the actual production cost instead of externalizing it, some people say that organic food is actually a more realistic price for what food should cost. Through subsidies and other means, non-sustainable forms of production have been propped up and given sort of a price advantage. So those are things that can be tackled through policy changes. We see that organic producers tend to be younger, more urban, and more educated, as well as women also are more represented as farmers in the organic agricultural side of things. Uh, and generally, organic producers have concern for the environment and ethical treatment of animals. And as more conventional producers shift over to being organic, the profile will continue to shift from that of early adopters. But the early adopters are who we're describing there. Carolyn offers a decision tree. It's kind of hard to see, I realize, but there are a lot of stages or questions that need to be addressed before a conventional producer makes the decision to convert to organic. So it's a rather complex set of issues that have to be resolved. Uh, just briefly, we can kind of walk through this. Starting at the top, it says, do you think organic farming is more environmentally friendly than conventional farming? And do you think organic foods are healthier? So there's two big ones, do you see value environmentally and in terms of health? If the answer to that's no, then probably they're going to remain conventional farmers. But many will say yes. Uh, the next question then is, do you think that cropping can be successful without the use of synthetic fertilizers or biocides? So using maybe biodynamic methods or other techniques. Again, if the answer is no, then probably going to stay conventional. But if yes, we continue down the decision tree here. Next is farming in an environmentally friendly way so important to you that you are willing to forego some of your income? So if the answer to that is yes, then Can you cover labor needs for organic farming with family labor, or are you willing to employ non-family labor? If the answer to that is yes, then we'll continue down the organic path. And if no, then on to conventional. But backing up to the previous question about foregoing income, if the answer is no, it's not necessarily the end of the line, right? So is sugar beet an important source of income? You know, if yes, are the labor requirements for organic sugar beets too high, or is it not profitable? Would it be profitable to sell the sugar beet quota? Uh, and then, if the answer to that's yes, are grapes, wines an important source of income? Uh, is the risk of a total crop failure too high? Do you expect too many problems from winemaking? So winemaking and other activities like that add what's called value added. So in other words, the producer not only does the agriculture, but they refine their agricultural products. So instead of just growing grapes, by turning that into wine, of course, you can get more income. And therefore, if you're growing grapes organically, which may not be as profitable as non-organic methods, at least by incorporating winemaking, for instance, we can bring profit back in. Uh, and actually, because consumer demand is often higher for organic wines, the profits can actually be greater. So it all depends on the package you put together. So that's where I'm going to stop. You can see there's more questions here, but just to give you a sense of the kind of issues that conventional farmers have to think about before they shift over. So, in terms of deciding to go organic, based on how those questions are answered, researchers have found these four basic types of farmers. The first are the committed conventional. We're going to remain conventional farmers, just don't see any viability in organic methods, and that does happen. There are those who are environmentally conscious but aren't willing to go fully down the organic path. Uh, there are the organic farmers who basically follow the path through to the end. And then there's the pragmatic conventional who, similar to the environmentally conscious, may make a few changes but are more or less going to remain within the conventional framework. Uh, so when we study organic farmers, some of the key reasons they do what they do is health. That's a strong motivator, right? Health concern. Um, this is consumers. Sorry, not producers. So when people buy organic food, one of the key concerns is their health. There's probably a fairly healthy fear of the kind of chemical inputs and so forth that conventional farming uses. Taste is also important. Many believe that organically produced foods are more tasteful, also environmentally friendly. So there's a link with green attitudes. Uh, Income has a complicated relationship. There's only a weak support for a linear relationship that is positive. So it's not just the wealthy who are buying organic, uh, although wealth does tend to increase the frequency of buying organic foods. But it's a little more complicated than that. There's also a gender effect where women are more likely to buy organic. And some studies have also found that non-white racial minorities are also more willing to buy organic food. Uh, Families with children, perhaps looking out for their children's health especially, have that extra motivation, are willing to buy organic, even if your income isn't that high, perhaps. Um, there isn't really an age effect. It doesn't have a clear relationship. So it's not just young people, it's not just middle-aged people, old people. So the full age spectrum is represented here. Education does have some linkage, but it's not a strong one. Being the more educated are more willing to buy organic foods. But then a convenience and the availability of organic food is also important. So, if you have to go way out of your way to a specialty store, that raises a level of inconvenience people may not be willing to put up with. But if your conventional grocery store has an organic section, well, that makes it a lot more convenient, right? So looking at organic agriculture, there's a growing market share of food, but with that comes some additional challenges. And critics of the organic movement say it's becoming too conventionalized. That is, some of the old enemies are becoming friends. Those enemies being big ag, multinational corporations have kind of adopted organic agriculture to a large degree and in some ways are at a competitive advantage when it comes to certification, making it more difficult, ironically, for small and family farms to compete in the organic space. We're seeing consolidation as a result. So the average organic farm size has more than doubled, and 80% of organic market is controlled by just two firms. So some of the very problems with the political economic structure of agri-food are being reinvented within the organic agricultural space. And that, that's one of the main reasons why we'll see that there are some alternative agri-food movements out there, and we'll deal with those separately. First, just a word, biodynamic agriculture we've mentioned earlier is a subset. It's a specific kind of organic agriculture that we've seen. It's more stringent, uh, makes use of natural dynamic systems. Some of these methods aren't fully understood by science, but many of them are. Much of it depends on crop rotations, using animal manure instead of synthetic fertilizers, integration of animal and natural cycles more broadly. Of course, conventional um, animal farming involves massive pollution in terms of animal waste, especially with the concentrated animal feed operations, the CAFOs. So this is certainly a better solution to that, and considered by many proponents to be more restrictive than general organic agriculture. All right, so that's it for now. Next video, we'll be looking at some alternative agri-food movements beyond organic. Thanks.